Part 1. The Man in the Corner. It was always the same. Every morning at 8:17 a.m. sharp, he rolled into the corner of Main and Jasper and parked himself just outside O'Malley's deli. He never spoke, never moved much, just sat there motionless in that battered, old-fashioned wheelchair with leather hand grips and a frayed cushion, like a piece of forgotten furniture no one knew how to discard. People walked by him like he was invisible. Sometimes they left coins in the tin cup by his footrest. Most of the time they didn't. Teenagers snickered. Grown-ups looked away. And a few well-meaning souls whispered pity under their breath. But no one really looked at him. To the town of Green Hollow, the man in the wheelchair was just a fixture. A rumor. A sad story they never bothered to ask. But that morning, everything began to change. The man's name was Samuel Blake, though no one called him that anymore. In fact, no one called him anything. Not in over 8 years. He had once been someone. A soldier. A husband. A father. Now he was just that guy in the chair. Samuel sat in his usual spot, the November wind stinging his face. He was wrapped in a gray wool blanket, one hand tucked under it, the other resting idly on the armrest. His eyes, though dulled by time and pain, never stopped watching. Not the kind of watching people noticed, but the kind that missed nothing. Across the street, the morning rush pulsed. Coffee cups, crosswalks, delivery vans. Life moving without him. A young boy ran past, holding his mother's hand. His laugh echoed in the chill air and hit Samuel like a brick. It always did. Not because of what he'd lost, but because of what he could never go back to. Inside the deli, Marcy O'Malley, the owner's daughter, waved at him like she always did. Cheerful, kind, but never close. She was one of the few who acknowledged him, even if it was with a safe, practiced smile. She brought him coffee some days. He never asked. She never stayed long. "Morning, Sam," she called out through the glass. He nodded slightly. His lips moved, but no sound came out. They never did anymore. People assumed he was mute. But it was grief that had silenced him. Not illness. Not injury. Not at first. At 9:02 a.m., the thief arrived. No one saw him slip through the alley. No one noticed him watching from behind the stack of newspaper bins. No one suspected the man in the beanie with the scuffed sneakers and that tattered army surplus jacket. Except Samuel. He noticed everything. The way the man's eyes darted too fast. How he lingered by the flower stand without buying anything. How his hands kept twitching inside his sleeves. He knew the signs. He used to wear them himself. He had trained men to spot threats like this. Before. Samuel's pulse quickened, but he didn't move. Not a twitch. He just waited. At 9:06, Marcy stepped outside with a cardboard box full of day-old pastries for the food shelter. She didn't see the man inching closer to the rear of the deli, where the safe was just beyond the back exit. No one did, except Samuel. The wheelchair squeaked slightly as he shifted his weight, just enough to reach beneath his blanket. There was no weapon, no phone, no panique, just timing. Marcy turned the corner to unlock the shelter bin behind the alley. The thief moved. Samuel's breath slowed. His muscles, though weak, remembered. The man lunged. But so did Samuel. Not physically, he couldn't. Not anymore. But what he could do was set a trap. Because this wasn't the first morning he had watched the thief. 2 weeks earlier, Samuel had spotted him. Lurking. Testing locks. Watching delivery times. Waiting for the perfect moment. He had watched the patterns. Measured the seconds. Timed the routes. And the night before, Samuel had slipped a motion sensor under the back gate. Connected to a single-use wireless trigger. Hidden in a tin cup. Powered by a battery salvaged from a discarded toy on the street. No one had helped him build it. No one knew he could. He hadn't told a soul. Why would they believe that the mute man in the wheelchair still had a soldier's mind? But now the sensor snapped. And everything changed. Alarms. Not loud ones, but a sharp chirp triggered a chain. A delayed car alarm across the street began to wail. The deli lights flickered. The garbage bin snapped shut by spring tension, slamming into the thief's leg as he rounded the corner. He screamed. Marcy dropped the box, startled. And Samuel, motionless, still in his chair, pressed the old footrest pedal with his heel, releasing a small steel wire that stretched across the sidewalk, nearly invisible to the eye. The thief stumbled forward. Bam! Straight into the delivery van. Chaos. Marcy screamed. Van driver jumped out. Bystanders rushed over. The thief tried to run, but his ankle twisted. He collapsed on the pavement, clutching his leg, gasping, panicked, trapped like a rat. And Samuel? Still motionless, still silent. The only thing he moved was his eyes. Police arrived 5 minutes later. Not because someone called, but because Samuel had already arranged it. Earlier that week, he had written an anonymous letter to Officer Delaney, explaining suspicious movements in the area, suggesting a patrol reroute. The officer didn't think much of it, but today was her first shift covering that block. She saw the thief go down, saw the trap, saw the still, silent man watching, and she knew. Who did this? Someone gasped. I think it was the guy in the chair, a woman whispered, stunned. No way, another muttered. He didn't even move. But Marcy was staring at Samuel, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. For the first time in 8 years, she really looked at him. And he looked back. Not with pity, not with shame, with purpose. The thief was handcuffed and loaded into the squad car. The wire, the trap, the sensors, they were all collected. Carefully, respectfully. Delaney didn't say much. But as she walked past Samuel, she nodded once. And he nodded back. Later that day, Marcy brought him a fresh cup of coffee. No words. No smiles. But she sat down next to him. Not across the street. Not behind glass. Next to him. You planned all that? She finally asked. Silence. But then his hand moved. Slowly, painfully, toward a small notebook under the blanket. He flipped it open. The pages were worn. And on the first line, in shaky but precise handwriting, were the words, I see what they don't. That was the first time anyone had heard or read Samuel Blake's voice in nearly a decade. But it wouldn't be the last. Because catching the thief was only the beginning. What Samuel knew, what he remembered, ran far deeper than that one crime. And what he was about to reveal would shake the town of Green Hollow to its very core. Part 2. The past he never spoke of. When Samuel Blake was 28 years old, he could run a mile in 6 minutes flat, bench press 260 pounds, and disarm an enemy in under 3 seconds. He had been sharp, quiet, and surgical in the field. But what made him truly dangerous wasn't the speed or the strength. It was how deeply he listened. That same silence, that same eerie stillness that unnerved people today, had once made him a legend in the special operations community. They called him Ghost, not because he vanished, but because no one ever saw him coming. 23 years earlier, in a war-torn district overseas, Captain Samuel Blake was leading a reconnaissance unit when his team walked into a trap. The intel had been off, deliberately, he would later learn, and the ambush cost 2 of his men their lives. Samuel was the only survivor, but survival came at a cost. 2 shattered vertebrae, nerve damage in both legs, and a brain injury that stripped him of speech for nearly a year. When he returned home, the uniform came off, but the silence stayed. Hey, mister, are you the guy from the paper? The question pulled Samuel out of his memory like a snap of cold water. It was 2 days after the thief incident. A young girl, no older than 10, stood in front of him, holding a chocolate chip cookie in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. She pointed to the front page. Local hero traps thief without moving. Samuel blinked, slowly, then nodded once. The girl grinned. That's awesome. He tried to smile. Came out crooked, rusty. But it came. Across the street, Green Hollow was changing. People who had once walked by without so much as a glance were now slowing down. waving, smiling, talking about the man in the wheelchair. For most, it was admiration. For a few, it was discomfort, because Samuel had broken the rules of their little town, the rule of invisibility. The rule that said people like him, quiet, broken, forgotten, were supposed to stay in the background. Now he wasn't background anymore, and that scared some people. Detective Harlan Vance wasn't scared, but he was curious. He had served in the force for over 20 years and didn't believe in coincidence. The trap, the coordination, the wiring, none of it fit with the town's idea of who Samuel Blake was. He showed up at the deli on Thursday morning. "Morning," Vance said, tipping his hat. Samuel looked up, nodded. Vance didn't waste time. "Mind if I sit?" Another nod. The detective took out a notepad, not because he needed to write anything, but because people trusted him more when he held it. "I read your file," he said plainly. "Army, Intel, Special Recon. That right?" Samuel didn't respond. Vance continued. "Saw the commendation, too. Silver Star. That's no small thing. You saved a lot of lives. And paid for it." Still no answer. But Samuel's eyes were steady, unblinking. "You planning to do that again?" Vance asked. "Set traps? Stop criminals? Or was that a one-time thing?" Samuel reached under his blanket, pulled out his notebook, and scribbled a single word. "Watch." By noon that day, a second article hit the internet. The local station had picked up Samuel's story and spun it into a 5-minute viral clip. It featured grainy cell phone footage from the thief's arrest, zoomed in on Samuel sitting quietly in his chair, unmoving as the chaos erupted around him. "Wheelchair man outsmarts robber without lifting a finger," the headline read. The clip spread fast. By sundown, it had 40,000 views. By midnight, over 200,000. The next morning, someone left a bouquet of sunflowers on Samuel's lap. No note, no name, just a single bloom resting against his hand. He didn't react, not on the surface, but something deep inside flickered, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. That same day, Marcy O'Malley sat with him again. Not out of pity, but because she wanted to. "Why don't you talk to people?" she asked. He tapped his notebook, then flipped to a clean page. "Most people don't know how to listen." She read the line twice. "But I do." He looked at her, and for the first time he smiled with his eyes. Later that week, Vance returned. Not alone. He brought a sealed manila folder. "Figured you might want to see this," he said. Samuel took it with trembling hands, opened it slowly. Inside, a black and white surveillance photo from 10 days ago. A man in a black hoodie entering the back of a warehouse. Nothing unusual except for the logo on the sleeve. It was the same military contractor logo Samuel had seen once before, overseas, on a patch worn by the man who had given the order that led to the ambush. Samuel's fingers gripped the photo tightly. Vance watched his reaction carefully. "You recognize him?" he asked. Samuel didn't answer. He just flipped the page in his notebook and wrote, "I need time." Vance nodded. "I'll give you that, but you let me know when you're ready." That night, Samuel didn't sleep. He hadn't dreamed in years, but his mind churned. The ambush, the betrayal, the cover-up, the man in the photo. He had come to Green Hollow to disappear, to live in silence and maybe eventually die in peace. But the past had followed him. And now it was here. 3 days later, the flower shop was robbed. No forced entry. Clean hit. All security disabled. Cash drawer emptied. But Samuel had seen something no one else had. The robber had hesitated at the entrance. Not because of fear, because he was waiting for something. A signal. Samuel checked his notebook. Dates, times, details. 2 other stores had been hit that month. Same pattern. Minimal disruption. No fingerprints. And always on Tuesdays. He wheeled himself to the alley behind the shop. A piece of red thread dangled from a drainpipe. To anyone else, it meant nothing. But to Samuel, it meant code. He followed the trail. Carefully. Slowly. It ended at a maintenance store behind the old bus station. And there, spray-painted in gray, barely visible under years of grime, was a symbol. Fox swallowing its tail. His blood ran cold. It was the Quiet Loop, a mercenary outfit once believed to be disbanded after a disastrous operation overseas. They were known for precision theft, contract manipulation, and killing their own to erase mistakes. And now they were here, in Green Hollow. The thief from earlier? He wasn't just a drifter. He had been scouting. Samuel returned to his corner the next morning. He sat, watched, planned, because this wasn't just about him anymore. The town was in danger, and he knew better than anyone what the Quiet Loop was capable of. The people had laughed at him once. Now they were starting to see. But what none of them knew, not yet, was that the man in the wheelchair was more than a silent hero. He was a man with unfinished business. And he wasn't done watching. Not by a long shot. Part 3. Ghost Protocol. Samuel Blake didn't like being seen. Not anymore. But over the past week, people kept stopping, asking, thanking. Some just stared. And yet, they didn't really see him. Not yet. They saw a viral clip. A headline. A surprise. Not a man who'd once been trained to disappear behind enemy lines and leave nothing but silence in his wake. It was Saturday when he wheeled to the bus station again. The symbol, the fox swallowing its tail, was still there behind the drain. This time he wasn't just looking. He was confirming. And he wasn't alone. From the shadows behind a shuttered ticket booth, a figure watched. Tall, broad, hoodie pulled low, face hidden. Samuel felt the gaze. Every instinct in him fired. He didn't flinch, didn't give away that he knew. Instead, he rolled forward slowly and flicked a cigarette but into the gutter. Deliberate. It landed on the exact spot where the symbol was. Covered it. Erased it. Message sent. Back at his apartment. Third floor walk-up he hadn't used in 6 years. He sat at the small wooden desk gathering dust. Everything had been left untouched. Drawers still held old army files. The corner closet still held his fatigues. And taped under the desk, still where he had left it, a slim black box. Inside were 6 things: a burner phone, a folded map of Green Hollow, an encrypted USB stick, a silver pocket watch, a small leather notebook, and a letter, sealed, addressed to Jacob Blake, his son. Jacob was 27 now, a trauma surgeon. He lived 3 states away and hadn't spoken to Samuel in almost a decade. Not since the night Samuel had left without a word. Back then, he believed disappearing was the only way to protect his son. The pain had been too much. The guilt. The weight of being a man who came back when others didn't. Who had failed to save his wife. But lately, something was shifting inside him. The town was in danger. The past was resurfacing. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to reconnect with the one person he had once lived for. That evening, Marcy brought hot soup and fresh cornbread. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside him under the awning outside the deli and said, "You ever get tired of being the ghost?" Samuel blinked, then pulled out his notebook and scribbled, "Being a ghost keeps people safe." Marcy leaned back. "Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it just keeps them away." She left shortly after, but her words stayed. The next morning, Samuel turned on the burner phone. Took a full minute to boot. The SIM was old, but still active. Only one number was programmed in. Sergeant First Class Nolan Dyer. A man who had served under Samuel in the field. A man who owed him everything. He typed a single message. "Quiet Loop. Green Hollow. You know what to do." Sent. No reply. None expected. But the machine was in motion. Meanwhile, Detective Harlan Vance stood inside the floral shop, scratching his chin. Second break-in this week. This time, they took surveillance footage. Nothing else. Clean, surgical, deliberate. He stared at the broken security system, wires cleanly cut, as if by someone who had studied blueprints. Then he noticed it. A faint outline of a symbol, smudged by mud. On the back wall, a fox, swallowing its tail. His blood turned to ice. Vance paid a visit to Samuel around noon. "Can we talk?" Samuel gestured to the bench beside him. "I checked into that symbol," Vance said. "It's not in any gang registry, not in any corporate logo lists, but something about it made my skin crawl." He waited, watched Samuel. "You know what it is, don't you?" Samuel pulled out his notebook. "You don't want to know. Try me." He flipped to a new page. "They erase history, burn trails, kill loose ends." Vance went quiet. "You saying they're here?" Samuel's eyes didn't blink, just stared. Vance leaned in, lowered his voice. "Then why haven't they come for you?" A beat of silence. Then Samuel wrote, "They think I'm still a ghost. But that illusion would only last so long." That evening, at exactly 11:04 p.m., a fire broke out at the old bus station. Local crews responded within minutes, but the alleyway and the fox symbol was gone. Samuel watched from a block away, not with fear, with focus. They were sending a message. So was he. The next morning, the deli window was shattered. No one took anything, but taped to the counter was a photo, grainy, zoomed in, of Samuel sitting in his chair. Someone had written across it in red marker, "Go back to your hole." The police took the photo. Marcy called her father, who hadn't come into town in months. Samuel said nothing, but inside, something ignited. He wheeled himself behind the counter for the first time, scanned the camera angles, mapped every entry point, and then he flipped to a page in his notebook and wrote, "You're not ready for war, but I am." That night, he wheeled himself into an alley near the bakery and waited. 3 hours passed. Finally, footsteps. 2 shadows moved like liquid across the wall. Efficient, dressed in black. Samuel waited. He knew this alley. He had prepared. As one of the men passed a trash bin, Samuel triggered a tripwire with his heel. The bin toppled. Not loudly, but enough to disorient. The second man spun, confused, and caught the flash of an old Polaroid camera Samuel had rigged behind a fire escape. Click, flash. He had their faces. Before they could approach, a motion sensor light snapped on overhead, and Samuel wheeled backward into a pre-marked escape ramp that cut through a maintenance corridor. Gone in seconds. At sunrise, he wheeled into the police station. He handed Vance the photo. One of the men was familiar, a former contractor with ties to a shady private defense group. Vance looked up at him. "How the hell did you get this?" Samuel tapped the notebook. "I've always been better in the shadows." Later that day, a woman arrived in town. Sharp eyes, military boots, small duffel bag. She walked straight to Samuel's bench. "You look like crap," she said with a smile. Samuel blinked twice, then smiled. It was SFC Nolan Dyer's daughter, Kira. Ex-Intel. Hacker. Field-trained. Stealth specialist. "My dad sends his regards." Said, "You're pulling ghosts out of closets again." He nodded once. "Where do we start?" she asked. Samuel flipped open his notebook and wrote, "We hunt the loop before they hunt this town." That night, in his third-floor apartment, Samuel pulled out the letter to Jacob. He unfolded it slowly. It was written the day he left home. He read it again. The words were raw, honest, heavy. "I left because I thought I was poison. I was wrong. If this letter reaches you, it means I'm fighting again. For you. For what I ran from. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a second chance to be the man I should have been." He folded the letter again and picked up the phone. He dialed the hospital in Charleston. Asked for Dr. Jacob Blake. The voice on the other end, "Who's calling?" He hesitated, then spoke for the first time in years. Voice scratchy, broken, but real. "Tell him it's his father." Part 4. The call that shouldn't have happened. The silence after the call wasn't peaceful. It was electric. Samuel Blake sat frozen in his dark apartment, the phone receiver resting in his lap. The quiet hum of the city seeped in through the cracked window, wind whistling, faint sirens in the distance, the hum of a world still turning. But in his chest time had stopped. He had spoken 3 words. 3 words he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. Tell him it's his father. He didn't expect a response, didn't ask for one, but deep down he hoped. 25 miles away, Dr. Jacob Blake was reviewing patient charts when a nurse handed him a note. It read, "Call from Green Hollow. Said it was your father." His pen stopped mid-sentence. He hadn't heard that word, father, in 9 years, and now it sat there, handwritten, underlined in red ink like a ghost from a different life. He closed the chart, sat back. His pulse ticked in his ears. Could it really be him? Back in Green Hollow, Samuel stared out over the alley behind the bakery, where the fox symbol had been painted over again, this time in fresh chalk. A message. He wasn't just being watched now. He was being dared. At 7 p.m. sharp, Samuel met Kira at the edge of City Park. She had already hacked the town's outdated security camera feed. What she showed him chilled him more than the threats. It was a video, time-stamped 3 days ago.
4:17 Uhr nachts.
2 men in tactical gear entered Marcy O'Malley's apartment building. They didn't break in. They had keys. They didn't steal anything. They just moved through the rooms, quietly, like ghosts. And before leaving, one of them placed a small object on her nightstand. Kira froze the frame. It was a toy soldier, identical to the one Samuel used to carry in his rucksack overseas. "This is personal," Kira said. Samuel nodded. "Someone knows who you are, Sam." He scribbled a note. "They want me scared. I want them sloppy." Meanwhile, in Charleston, Jacob Blake sat in his car outside the hospital, gripping the steering wheel like it might snap. He wasn't angry. He was numb. The last time he saw his father, Samuel had been distant, withdrawn, just a shell of the man who had once taught him how to climb trees, tie knots, and survive without fear. And then one day Samuel was gone. A letter, a voicemail, silence.
No funeral. No goodbye.
Jacob had learned to live with the ache. Now the ache was calling him back. He didn't call that night. Instead, he watched the viral video again, the clip of the wheelchair man outsmarting the thief. He froze the frame, zoomed in. There was no mistaking those eyes. His father hadn't died. He had just disappeared. Back in Green Hollow, things got worse. At 10:42 a.m., a smoke bomb exploded inside the town library. No injuries, no fire, just chaos. And on the floor, left behind in red chalk, another fox, this time with its tail cut off. Samuel got the message. "We're not playing anymore." Detective Vance was furious. "They're baiting us like amateurs," he said, slamming a file onto his desk. "They want fear. They want control." He turned to Samuel, who sat across from him in the quiet conference room, his expression unreadable. "You're the only one who knows how these guys operate. We need your help, Blake." Samuel opened his notebook. "I need freedom to move, and someone to watch Marcy." "You think she's a target?" Samuel underlined the word yes. Vance sighed. "Done. But if this escalates, I can't keep the brass off your back." Samuel wrote one more line. "Then I'll do it my way." That night, Samuel returned to the apartment and opened the encrypted USB stick. Inside were blueprints, all of Green Hollow, sewer systems, camera blind spots, emergency exit routes, old electrical access points dating back to the 1960s. He wasn't preparing to run. He was preparing to trap the quiet loop, the same way they had once trapped him. He started building. Old parts.
Radio wire. Laptop battery.
Motion sensors rigged from dismantled toys and smart plugs. Everything small enough to hide in a backpack or tape beneath a bench. He called them ghost nests. Kira helped set up 6 by sunrise. Each one would log movement, faces, time of day, feeding into a private offline database Samuel was building by hand. Green Hollow didn't know it yet, but the war had already started. At 3:17 p.m., the phone rang. He froze, picked it up. Dad. The voice on the other end was older than he remembered. Steadier, but it cracked on the last syllable. Is it really you? Samuel swallowed hard, then whispered, yes. A long pause. Then why now? Samuel glanced at the half-built motion trap on the table, then at the leather notebook on the floor. He spoke again. Slow, raspy, but clear. Because I'm scared. Another pause. I thought you weren't scared of anything, Jacob whispered. I was wrong, Samuel said. I'm scared of dying before you know who I really am. Jacob was silent, processing. Then finally he said, I'll come. Samuel blinked, stunned. Just don't disappear again. I won't, Samuel said softly. Not this time. 2 days later, Jacob arrived. No press, no drama. Just a quiet rental car pulling into a small town covered in early December frost. He stood outside the deli, unsure. Then he saw him, the man in the chair. Same face, older, but unmistakably his father. They didn't hug, they didn't cry, they just stood there. And for the first time in 9 years, they looked at each other. Really looked. Inside the deli, Marcy watched from behind the counter. She didn't say anything, but she smiled, because she knew. That night, Samuel showed Jacob the maps, the fox symbols, the break-ins, the traps, and Jacob listened, not as a doctor, not as a son who had been abandoned, but as a man who knew what it meant to live with ghosts. What do you want me to do? Jacob asked quietly. Samuel handed him a notebook. It wasn't his usual one. It was leather-bound, full of entries, diagrams, even sketches. He had written it over years. It was titled, How to Catch a Ghost. As the sun set, a figure stood on a rooftop 3 blocks away, watching the light flicker in Samuel's apartment. He raised a phone, dialed. They've activated the old man, he said. And the sun is here now. A pause. Then, do we proceed? Another pause. Understood. The figure hung up and disappeared into the shadows. Part 5. The blueprint beneath the town. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fresh regret. Jacob Blake sat across from his father at a corner booth, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyes flickering from the stack of notebooks to the map laid out like a war plan between their plates. Outside the window, Green Hollow moved like nothing was wrong. Christmas lights twinkled along Main Street. Children clutched hot cocoa. The bakery had a snowman made of sugar in the window. But Jacob could feel it, the tension under the town's skin, like something was coming, and only 2 people knew what. You really think they're going to hit again? Jacob asked. Samuel didn't respond with words. He simply tapped a page in the notebook he'd labeled Ghost Nest Data, Day 2. It showed a grid of time-stamped activity. Shadows slipping in and out of the same alleyways. Infrared logs picking up movement in blind spots. Facial recognition hits, partial but enough. Jacob frowned. How did you even build this stuff? Samuel gave a tired smile, then wrote on a clean page. Some people build fences to feel safe. I build patterns to see the danger before it hits. Back at the apartment, Kira was connecting another Ghost Nest node to a private server cobbled together from scrap tech and old routers. You ever work with a team this small before? She asked Jacob without looking up. He shook his head. In the OR, I've got 10 people. Monitors. A sterile field. This. He looked at the blinking nodes, the wires snaking across the floor, and the silent man at the window who hadn't said a full sentence in years. This feels like we're fighting a war with paperclips.
Kira smirkede.
Welcome to the Blake Resistance. Meanwhile, the quiet loop wasn't waiting. In a back room beneath an abandoned church on the west side of town, a man named Clark reviewed the same map Samuel had. He circled locations. Deli, flower shop, bus station, apartment. 3 days, he said to the team. Then we shut him down. Completely. A woman across the table asked, What about the sun? Clark smiled. Collateral. Like the mother. At midnight, Samuel had another nightmare. Not the kind with monsters. The kind where you're powerless. He was back in that convoy. Desert wind cutting his face. Radio crackling. Orders screamed in broken code. Then the blast. Heat. Silence. And the impossible realization, he had made the wrong call. 2 men died because he believed in the wrong voice. One of those men was his best friend. The other, the only man who knew the truth. The ambush hadn't been a mistake. It had been ordered. He woke in a sweat, gasping, fists clenched in his lap. Jacob sat across the room, watching quietly, not speaking. Finally, Samuel rasped. His name was Dalton. Jacob blinked. The man who died? Samuel nodded, then whispered, "He didn't." The room froze. Kira looked up from her laptop. "What do you mean he didn't?" Samuel took a long, slow breath. Then, for the first time, he told them the full story. Dalton was his second in command. The strategist. Cold. Precise. And the one man Samuel trusted with his life. Until that mission. They were ordered into a village they'd already cleared 2 days before. The intel was shaky. Samuel pushed back. Dalton insisted. Minutes later, the blast. Dalton went missing. Presumed dead. Samuel never questioned it. Until 6 months ago, when he saw a man in a grainy security cam photo from a break-in in Detroit, tall, shaved head, same gait, and the same fox tattoo on his right forearm. The same man who had designed their last field protocol. Dalton had joined the loop. "Why didn't you tell anyone?"
Kira whispered.
Samuel's jaw tightened. "Because if he's alive, then I was wrong. About everything. About who to trust. About who died. About why I left my son." He looked at Jacob now, barely able to hold his gaze. "I didn't want you raised by a man who couldn't tell the difference between a soldier and a traitor." Jacob didn't respond, just stood, walked to the window, breathed, then said quietly, "But I would have preferred having a broken father over no father at all." That line didn't hit Samuel like a slap. It hit like a healing wound, because pain meant something still mattered. And in that moment, Samuel realized there was still time to become the father his son remembered. At 3:04 a.m., one of the ghost nests pinged. The camera by the bakery alley caught a vehicle. Unmarked. Windows blacked out. Parked for 42 seconds. A man got out, dropped something in the trash, then drove off. Jacob and Kira suited up. Samuel followed slowly, but with purpose. They reached the alley just before dawn. Kira retrieved the object. It was a small tin like an old Altoids box. Inside a SIM card, burned at the edges, just barely intact. Kira ran a forensic trace. It wasn't a message. It was a trigger. Back at the apartment, Kira isolated the signal. She traced it to a secondary server that blinked online just hours ago. The metadata told a chilling truth. The loop was syncing all motion and camera activity in Green Hollow through a dormant emergency broadcast tower. They were watching everything. "Why sync now?" Jacob asked. Samuel pointed to the map, then circled City Hall. "Because the town parade is tomorrow," Kira said. "Thousands of people. No security." And then it hit them. This wasn't about Samuel. This was about Green Hollow. The loop was planning to use the chaos as cover for a major operation. Not a robbery. A message. "They're going to detonate something," Kira muttered. "No," Samuel said. "They're going to take someone. High profile. A mayor. Maybe even a police chief. They'll vanish, and no one will see it coming." He looked at Vance's name on the patrol roster. Then at Marcy's Deli, which would be hosting the food tent. And for the first time, Samuel's hand trembled. Because he wasn't worried about himself anymore. He was worried about everyone else. "We need to stop this before it starts," Jacob said. Samuel nodded, then flipped to a blank page. He wrote, "Then we go full ghost." By sunrise, they had a plan. Kira would rewire the emergency broadcast tower to isolate the loop's sinking ability. Jacob would infiltrate the town's first aid post, a medical tent, and watch for any extraction signals. Samuel would remain hidden at a high vantage point, rigging traps around key corridors near City Hall. The whole town would be their chessboard, and they would be ghosts. 3 blocks away, Clark stood beside the van that would roll through the parade route. He pulled out a photo from his jacket. Samuel Blake. He smiled. Let's give the ghost something to haunt. Part 6. Ghost in the Crowd. The morning of the parade dawned crisp and clear, with just enough wind to rattle the flags strung between the lampposts on Main Street. Green Hollow hadn't looked this festive in years. Children clutched candy canes. Vendors lined the sidewalks with popcorn, cider, and hand-woven crafts. The mayor stood on a small wooden stage near City Hall, shaking hands and smiling for photos. It all looked perfect, but Samuel Blake knew better. Perfect days made perfect cover. He sat atop the abandoned printing building on 4th and Maple, the highest vantage point still within 3 blocks of the parade. From here, he had eyes on the main stage, the food tents, the first aid station, and, crucially, the alleyways between the old record shop and the back of City Hall. Those alleys were ghost corridors.
No cameras.
No foot traffic.
No noise.
If he were planning an extraction, that's where he'd do it. Kira was stationed across the street inside an unmarked telecom van, tapping into the broadcast tower's backup signal. She wore noise-canceling buds and a mic feed straight into Samuel's earpiece. I've blocked their signal routing on 3 channels, she whispered. They'll have to go dark or go loud. Samuel's hand tightened on the side of his wheelchair. Going loud is what they want, he muttered. Meanwhile, Jacob adjusted his name tag in the first aid tent. He wore medical scrubs, gloves, and an earpiece of his own. He was logged in as Dr. James Ellis, a volunteer from the nearby clinic. His job was to monitor the medical feed and, more importantly, spot anything unusual, overdoses, fainting, manufactured medical chaos that might be used to draw resources away from a hit point. But what he really wanted was to watch his father. The man who was once a ghost was now a general again. By 10:12 a.m., the parade had begun. Marching bands moved in sync. Confetti rained down. Children screamed with delight as a Santa on stilts handed out toys from a rolling sleigh. At 10:15, a local news team went live on the air. Their cameras swept over the crowd, zooming in on joyful faces. That's when Samuel saw it. Just for a second. A man in the back of the crowd standing too still, not clapping, not laughing, not watching the parade, watching the people, watching who was where. Samuel tapped the mic. Kira.
Red Hat.
Brown coat. West side. Marked. Got him, Kira replied. Running facial. Wait. Silence. Sam, we've got a hit. Who? Name's Jacob Langford. Former NSA contractor. Went rogue 5 years ago. Tied to 4 countries, 2 shell corps, and 1 known quiet loop safe house in Prague. Samuel's voice went cold. Then he's not just here to watch. Down at street level, Langford moved. Not fast, but precise. He crossed from the crowd into a side alley, the one Samuel had marked the night before. The trap corridor. Target entering Sector 2, Samuel whispered. Prepare Phase 1. Kira activated the ghost nest sensor hidden behind the alley's drainpipe. But nothing pinged.
No trigger.
No signal, Samuel asked.
Kira swore.
They're using signal scramblers. Of course, they weren't coming in tech-heavy. They were going analog, old school, like Samuel. At 10:24 a.m., a woman collapsed near the front of the crowd. EMTs rushed in. Another collapse followed. Then a third. Kira, Jacob said urgently from the first aid tent. I'm getting irregular vitals on 3 patients.
No trauma.
No injuries, but all collapsed within 90 seconds. Bio-attack? Kira asked.
No.
Something else. Maybe a gas leak, but Samuel interrupted. No, he said. It's misdirection. He scanned the crowd again. And then he saw her, Marcy, standing near the soup stand, handing out cups. Oblivious. Behind her, two men, approaching slowly, too slowly. Samuel's heart dropped. She's the target. He didn't wait, didn't ask permission. He moved, wheeled away from the rooftop and into the stairwell. His fingers gripped the rail. His body screamed, but he forced himself forward. Down the steps, one at a time. Kira's voice crackled in his ear. "What are you doing? You're exposed." But he didn't answer, didn't have the breath. At 10:27 a.m., Jacob saw the two men reach for Marcy. He sprinted out of the tent, ripping the badge from his chest, shoving through the crowd. "Marcy!" he screamed, but it was too loud. She didn't hear. One man grabbed her elbow. She turned, confused, just as the second one slipped something from his jacket. A syringe. Jacob was still 30 feet away. Kira was locked out of the signal, and Samuel was still a block behind. Then came the scream. Not from Marcy, from the man, the one with the syringe. He crumpled to the pavement, grasping his knee. A sharp piece of metal protruded from his leg. A thin, improvised spike fired from beneath a park bench. Another ghost nest. Triggered. The second man turned to run. But Samuel had already crossed the street. And though he was panting, sweating, nearly collapsed, he had enough left to press the final trigger under his wheelchair. Two smoke charges burst from a nearby trash can. The crowd screamed, but it created the perfect distraction. Jacob reached Marcy, pulled her behind the food tent, and Samuel, collapsing now, watched as the second assailant vanished into the smoke. Gone. But not successful. Police stormed in. Confusion. Screams. Orders shouted over megaphones. But in the middle of it all, Samuel sat, in his chair, hands trembling, breath ragged, but his eyes steady. Marcy was shaken, coughing, but safe. Jacob leaned over his father. "You okay?" Samuel nodded. "Just barely." "You stopped them," Jacob said. Samuel looked up at him, then whispered, "Not all." At 11:03 a.m., Kira sent a file to Samuel's phone. The loop had activated a secondary signal, just after the failed extraction. Coordinates led to an old textile mill outside town. "Fallback location," she said. Samuel exhaled. "They're retreating." But he knew better. They weren't just falling back. They were regrouping. And next time, they wouldn't fail. Later that night, Jacob and Samuel sat in the apartment, surrounded by silence. The town was safe, for now. But Samuel wasn't celebrating. He stared at the photo Kira had pulled from a new data cache. A man, half-shadowed, standing in the textile mill. Broad shoulders, shaved head, right forearm partially visible. And just beneath the sleeve, a faded tattoo. A fox. Dalton. Still alive. Still out there. Still watching. Samuel traced the outline of the image with his finger. And for the first time since the ambush, he whispered his name. Dalton. Part 7. The face in the photograph. Rain rolled off the fire escape like tears down a weathered face. Samuel Blake sat alone in the shadows of his apartment. The photo of Dalton laid out before him. The old paper map of Green Hollow had been folded and unfolded so many times it now split along the creases. Every pin, every scribble, every ghost nest was still active. But tonight wasn't about technology. It was about memory. Dalton James Worth. They had once served side by side. Same division, same rank. Two sons of war, shaped by blood and betrayal. Dalton had been Samuel's brother in everything but name, until the village, the ambush, and the silence that followed. That night had shattered everything. And yet, here he was again, a ghost that didn't stay dead. Jacob stood in the doorway, watching his father trace the lines of Dalton's face with a shaking fingertip. "You okay?" he asked gently. Samuel looked up slowly, then gave the smallest nod. But Jacob saw through it. "What did he mean to you?" Samuel took a long breath. then reached for his notebook. He was the only man I trusted to save your life if I couldn't. Jacob sat beside him. But he didn't. A pause. Then Samuel wrote. Maybe he thought he was. Downstairs, Kira updated her network logs. The quiet loop wasn't retreating, they were dividing. The failed extraction had been a probe, not a full attack. The real hit, she believed, was still coming. She watched the satellite ping from the textile mill. Heat signatures, multiple bodies, and one unmoving figure alone sitting inside the largest chamber. Dalton, she muttered, waiting. But for what? By morning, Green Hollow was quiet again. The parade made the news. The attempted kidnapping was labeled an isolated incident. Police were investigating a known group of transient thieves. But the truth? Buried. Samuel wheeled himself through the town square like he used to. Slow, invisible, still. Only now people saw him. They waved, thanked him. A child ran up and hugged his leg. He didn't speak, but he nodded. The world was changing, but danger hadn't passed. That night, Samuel made a decision. He handed Jacob the master key to the apartment. Then the notebook labeled, failsafe. What is this? Jacob asked. Samuel's voice was raspy, quiet. Everything. Inside were plans for full evacuation routes, panic protocols, medical access, supply caches, even letters, to Marcy, to Vance, to Kira, all in Samuel's handwriting. Why now? Jacob asked. Samuel didn't answer, because he didn't want to say it out loud, because I might not come back. Kira intercepted a loop message fragment. Encrypted, high level but not fully masked. 3 words. The fox returns. She showed it to Samuel. What's it mean? She asked. He stared at it, then whispered, he's calling me. The next morning, Samuel left the apartment before dawn. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't leave a note. But he rolled down Maple Street with purpose. Every bump in the sidewalk hurt. Every push of the wheel burned. But he kept going. He reached the textile mill by 6:14 a.m. A mist hung low. The chain-link fence had been cut open. He rolled through.
No guards. No traps.
Just silence. And then a voice. Been waiting on you, ghost. Dalton stepped from the shadows. Older. Leaner. But the same unmistakable presence. Fox tattoo still etched on his forearm. He wasn't armed. At least, not visibly. Samuel stopped his chair 10 feet away. Dalton spread his hands.
No tricks.
No games. Just us. Silence. I figured you'd come, Dalton said. You always hated loose ends. Samuel nodded once. Dalton stepped closer. You want answers? I'll give you one. That village, that mission, it wasn't a betrayal. He paused. It was a trade. Samuel's jaw clenched. He spoke, barely. What did you trade? Dalton looked down, then said, You. The world tilted. Dalton continued, You were the prize, Sam. The one who wouldn't bend. The one who knew too much. They wanted you silenced. I gave them what they wanted, a mission that would bury you. Samuel stared at him, rage rising in his throat like bile. You think I'm proud of it? Dalton said bitterly. I stayed dead for 9 years. I watched them gut villages, assassinate journalists, and rewrite the truth. And I let it happen. He stepped forward. Until I saw your name show up again. On footage. In this nothing town. Dalton's eyes softened. I needed to know if the man I betrayed was still alive inside that chair. Samuel's fists gripped the wheels. Dalton didn't flinch. You want to kill me, he said. Samuel didn't deny it. But listen first, Dalton said. There's a bigger hit coming. One you won't stop with traps and gadgets. He tossed a flash drive at Samuel's feet. It's all there. Names, plans, timelines. He stepped back. But if you want it, you have to believe I didn't come here to finish you. A long pause. Then Samuel whispered, Why now? Dalton looked at him. I couldn't stand the idea of dying before I said sorry. Samuel didn't answer, didn't pick up the drive, didn't nod, but he didn't turn away either. They stood there, two ghosts in a crumbling building, as the sun rose behind broken windows. And for a moment the war paused. Back at the apartment, Jacob paced. He knew something was wrong. No messages.
No, Samuel.
Kira ran a drone scan. He's at the mill. Alone? Jacob asked. Yes. Jacob grabbed his jacket. If he doesn't come back by sunset, I go in. But at 5:02 p.m., the front door creaked open. Samuel wheeled inside. Alive, quiet, exhausted, and holding a flash drive. Jacob stood up, relief washing over his face. Samuel handed him the drive, then whispered, "Now we end it." Part 8. The drive that opened everything. They didn't plug in the flash drive right away. Samuel had seen men die for less. He placed it on a metal tray in the center of the room, backed it with a Faraday bag, and nodded for Kira to do her thing. She examined it with digital gloves, isolated it on an air-gapped laptop, and launched a series of deep scans for dormant malware, tripwire executables, and data shredders. Jacob watched silently, still shaken from seeing his father return from the mill. Alive, but changed. He hadn't asked what had happened with Dalton. He knew Samuel would only tell him if it mattered. Kira leaned back after an hour. "It's clean," she said. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Kira rolled her eyes. "As clean as any drive handed to you by a man who once tried to kill you can be." He nodded once. "Opening it now," she said. The screen filled with folders. They were labeled with military precision. Hollow reboot. BLKRMR. Redacted. Financial link. Stage 3. Jacob leaned in. "What are these?" Samuel tapped one. Hollow reboot. The files inside were disturbing. Blueprints of Green Hollow's civic buildings. Staff directories with highlighted individuals. Survivability ratings. Disruption chains. It wasn't just a mission file. It was a playbook for replacing the town's leadership. Kira scrolled to a file marked Execution Timeline. The page listed 10 names. Marcy O'Malley was third. Detective Vance was fifth. The mayor was first. And Samuel's was circled in red. Jacob sat down hard. "This isn't just an op," he said. "It's a purge." Samuel nodded slowly, then scribbled in his notebook. "They want to test a takeover model. Use a town with weak national attention. Replace its structure without bullets. Prove it can be done quietly." Kira said what they were all thinking. If they succeed here, they'll do it everywhere. For the next 2 hours, the trio worked in silence. Kira mapped out the digital infrastructure. Quiet Loop was using ghost IPs routed through defunct military satellites. Jacob began cold calling every name on the list, warning them anonymously, setting up low-profile escapes. And Samuel traced the timeline. There was a countdown. The files indicated the final operation, codenamed the Tether Cut, would begin at 2 p.m., just 2 days from now. They had 48 hours to dismantle a machine built in the shadows for over a decade. That night, Jacob sat beside his father in the quiet apartment. The street below was empty. Cold wind rattled the windows. Samuel broke the silence. "Do you remember the night your mother died?" Jacob tensed. "Yes." Samuel's voice was a low rasp. "I don't." Jacob turned slowly. Samuel continued. "I was so far gone, medicated, numb. I remember her leaving, but not the look on her face." He clenched his fist. "I never forgave myself for surviving that day." Jacob swallowed hard. "She forgave you," he said. Samuel shook his head. "I never did." In the other room, Kira stared at a file marked Black Remember. It was encrypted with a 9-point key. She cracked it after 43 minutes. Inside was a single video, time-stamped 11 years ago. It showed a small room, fluorescent lights, a military table, a young Samuel, upright, furious, slamming a fist into a dossier. "You gave me bad intel," he barked. Off-screen, a voice replied, "You were meant to fail. Then, you needed to disappear, Captain. Your conscience is bad for business." Kira froze the frame. She called Jacob in, showed him the file. His face drained. "This is proof," he whispered. "Of what?" Kira asked. Jacob looked her dead in the eye. "That my father was targeted by the same people he once fought for." They showed it to Samuel. He didn't cry, but he didn't look away, just nodded. "Now we burn them." By 6 a.m. the next day, Vance was in the loop, literally and figuratively. They met him in the basement of an abandoned school near the East Industrial Corridor. He stared at the video, at the execution list, at the classified files with Black Ops seals. Then he exhaled slowly and said, "Well, I guess retirement's gonna have to wait." He handed Samuel a keychain. "Access to the armory. Still has some of the old gear. Tear gas, body armor, surveillance tech. I'll vouch for the missing inventory. It's time the town knew who's really protecting it." That same day, Kira intercepted a new signal, encrypted in the loop's highest cipher. She cracked it. It read, "Asset recovered. Package delivery set. 27 hours. Confirmed." Jacob asked, "What's the package?" Kira turned pale. "It's a person." The files pointed to one more name not on the original execution list. Jacob Blake. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to use him. A hostage. Insurance. A way to make Samuel stop. They all understood now. Dalton hadn't just handed them information. He had restarted the war. And Jacob? Jacob was the battlefield. At 9:11 p.m., Samuel sat with Jacob under a rusted train bridge and told him the truth. All of it. The ambush, the betrayal, the silence, the exile. He told him about the moment he almost took his own life, and the moment he stopped, because he had a letter from Jacob's kindergarten teacher in his pocket. A picture Jacob had drawn of him, in uniform, with the words, "My dad protects people." "I couldn't let that be a lie," Samuel whispered. Jacob didn't say anything. He just took his father's hand and squeezed. The next day was their last. The day before the tether cut. The day before the town fell, or woke up. And for the first time since this began, Samuel Blake didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man who was finally coming back to life. Part 9. The last will forward. The morning of the tether cut felt wrong. The town looked the same. Morning joggers, sleepy storefronts, wind curling through alleyways like it had a secret. But something in the air had changed. Samuel Blake felt it in his chest. That old, tight coil of instinct. Like before a mission you know might end with no one coming home. Inside the basement of the old printing press, Jacob and Kira were wiring the last ghost nest. "Battery charge. Full," she said. Jacob clipped the wire to a small contact node hidden in a vent. Kira glanced at the old man beside her. Face carved with exhaustion, but steady as stone. "You sure about this?" she asked. Samuel didn't respond. He just handed her a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. "If I fall, you lead." Jacob crouched beside him. "I'm not letting you fall," he said. Samuel turned to him, then softly but clearly spoke. "Sometimes, falling is part of the plan." By 11 a.m., the operation was live. The target was no longer abstract. It had a location, a time, a face.
Mayor LNRHYS.
They would strike during her walk to the city courthouse. A 2-minute window with limited security and a media distraction nearby. Classic loop tactics. Pull resources, isolate the target, remove, replace. But they weren't counting on the ghost in the chair. Samuel stationed himself near the monument across from the courthouse, disguised as part of a veterans exhibit. A flag draped across his lap. Fake medals pinned to his chest. He looked like a prop. That was the point. Kira was across the street, tapped into loop radio frequencies via a wireless node hidden in the fire hydrant. Radio chatter rising, she said. They're here. Jacob stood near the courthouse steps, disguised as a civilian photographer. The camera on his chest was a decoy. His eyes weren't watching the lens. They were watching the crowd. 12:03 p.m. The mayor stepped onto the sidewalk, surrounded by aides and 2 security officers. A staged protest erupted half a block away. Pre-planned, orchestrated, designed to thin the line. Samuel tapped his earpiece. Now. Kira activated a ghost nest. A sidewalk grate exploded in harmless smoke, the diversion they needed. As the guards turned their heads, 2 men emerged from opposite ends of the crowd, moving fast. Both carried briefcases. Only one was real. Samuel's eyes flicked left, then right, then to a third figure hidden behind a news van. Too still, too careful. He'd seen this before. A third layer. The real hit. He whispered into the mic. 3 operatives. Adjust plan. Kira redirected visual tracking. Jacob moved. The briefcase carriers split off, running in different directions. Decoys. But the third man? He stepped into the crowd and reached inside his coat. Jacob sprinted. Gun! He yelled. Crowd screamed. The mayor's detail dropped, shielding her. And Samuel? Samuel moved. He rolled forward with a sudden burst, hitting a pressure pad built into the sidewalk grate. A spring-loaded pole launched upward. The third man staggered, off balance, just long enough for Jacob to crash into him. They both hit the ground hard. The gun skidded across the pavement, but the man recovered first. He grabbed Jacob by the collar, raised a second weapon from his boot, and then a sound cracked through the air. Pop. The man dropped, spasming. A taser dart lodged in his back. Kira stepped forward, holding the modified launcher from her bag. Not today, she said. Police flooded in. Chaos. Media. Screams. But the mayor? Unharmed. Jacob? Shaken but standing. Samuel? Still in motion. Because he knew one thing. That wasn't the real hit. Back at the Ghost Nest terminal, Kira's screen lit up with a red pulse. Secondary activation. She swore. They're pulling out. But not empty-handed. She tracked the ping. Industrial corridor. Storage Depot 7. That's where the loop would vanish. That's where they'd take Jacob. Where they'd reset the game. Unless someone stopped them. Samuel turned to Jacob. You stay.
No.
Samuel grabbed his son's arm. Stronger than Jacob expected. I said stay. You can't go alone. I'm not alone. He nodded to Kira. She's with me. An hour later, they rolled into the corridor in an old maintenance van. The rain had returned, misting the city in silver and ash. Storage Depot 7 loomed like a dead whale. Windowless, hulking, quiet.
Kira tjekkede her weapon.
You sure he'll be there? Samuel whispered. He always finishes what he starts. They entered through the back. Samuel rolled quietly. Kira moved like mist beside him. Inside, the place was empty. Too empty. And then a voice echoed. You're late, Ghost. Dalton stepped out from behind a pillar. Unarmed. Alone. But calm. You got my files, he said. Did what I hoped. Samuel didn't move. Dalton continued. I had to play both sides, Sam. If I defected outright, they'd kill me. This way, I deliver you, and I end them from within. Kira raised her weapon. Deliver him? You told them where we were. Dalton held up his hands. I bought time. Samuel stared at him, then asked, Where's the real hit? Dalton paused. The courthouse was cover. The real operation was the police database. They weren't going to kill the mayor. They were going to replace your entire law enforcement chain using fake federal warrants. He stepped forward. I sent the final batch to Vance. Told him what to do. Suddenly, gunfire outside.
Kiraspun.
They're here. Dalton tossed her a keycard. Door in the back. Secured room. You'll find the transfer drives. Burn them. Samuel looked at him. You staying? Dalton nodded. They don't know I flipped. I'll buy you 5 minutes. Kira pulled Samuel toward the rear exit. He looked back. Dalton smiled. Forgive me or don't, but let me do this right. They escaped. As the gunfire closed in. As Dalton stepped into the dark with his hands raised. And as the door slammed shut behind them, Samuel whispered, "Goodbye, brother." Part 10. What remains standing. The servers burned. Inside the secure room of Storage Depot 7, the last of Quiet Loop's local data nodes melted into blue sparks as Kira smashed them with the butt of her weapon. Beside her, Samuel Blake sat motionless in his wheelchair, watching the flames consume the evidence. The lies, the falsified identities, the digital blueprint for turning towns into puppets. But even as the data died, he knew it wasn't over. Not until he said it was. Outside, gunfire snapped like broken bone. Dalton's voice echoed from the entrance as he confronted the incoming Loop agents, playing the final card he'd held for years. Samuel didn't need to see it. He'd seen enough sacrifice to know what it sounded like. A silence that follows a single shot. A silence that stays. Kira whispered, "We have to move." Samuel nodded. They exited through the service ramp, fading into the fog like shadows leaving a battlefield. Police sirens rose in the distance, drawing toward the flames and wreckage of the Loop's last stronghold in Green Hollow. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Local police chief uncovers deep state interference network. Former intelligence operative burns national syndicate from inside. Town hero in wheelchair linked to major counterterror op. But Samuel didn't read them. He just sat at his usual spot near O'Malley's deli, watching the morning unfold. This time, people didn't look past him. They looked at him. They smiled. They stopped. And they thanked him. Marcy brought coffee. "Never thought I'd serve a national hero," she said. Samuel smiled faintly, then pointed to a kid across the street, tossing snow in the air. "He's the hero. He still believes in good." She paused, then added gently, "So do I." In the following weeks, Green Hollow returned to life. The mayor reinstated a civilian oversight board. Detective Vance was promoted to regional director and quietly backed a bill to prevent municipal digital takeovers. The story of the Loop faded from the news cycle, but not from memory. Jacob stayed. At first, he said it was temporary, to make sure his father recovered from the ordeal. But he never left. One night, he asked, "Why'd you really disappear, Dad?" Samuel looked at him across the table, then said the hardest truth. "I thought you'd be safer, without a man who only knew how to fight." Jacob nodded slowly. "Then you were wrong." A pause. "You didn't disappear to protect me, Dad. You disappeared because you couldn't forgive yourself." Samuel blinked hard, then whispered, "Can you?" Jacob stood, walked over, and put his hands on his father's shoulders. "I already did." Weeks passed. One afternoon, a government sedan pulled up outside Samuel's building. A woman in a gray suit stepped out. Badge. High clearance. She introduced herself as Agent Tenley. "We've reviewed the files. Your counter-operation was effective," she said. Samuel stayed silent. She handed him a letter, official. Inside, an offer. Consultant to National Infrastructure Protection. Kira, who stood nearby, read it over his shoulder. "Well," she said, "that's one way to never retire." Samuel took the letter, folded it in half, and passed it to Jacob. "Your call," he said. Jacob smiled. "You've already done enough. It's time someone else took the lead." The next spring, a statue was unveiled in the town square. It showed a man in a wheelchair, head up, eyes focused. The plaque read, "In honor of those who see what others miss and choose to act anyway. Samuel Blake, defender of Green Hollow." Samuel didn't attend the ceremony, but he watched from the corner of Main and Jasper, same spot as always. Only this time he wasn't invisible. He was seen. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, Jacob found Samuel outside, staring into the distance. "You okay?" Samuel nodded. then handed him a sealed envelope. Jacob opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing, a crayon portrait of a man in a uniform holding hands with a child. At the top, the words, "My dad protects people." Jacob smiled. "You kept it." Samuel looked at him, voice low but certain. "It kept me." In the final chapter of his life, Samuel Blake didn't seek revenge. He didn't chase glory. He rebuilt. One morning, one moment, one truth at a time. And when people asked who he was, they didn't say, "That guy in the wheelchair." They said, "That's the man who saved us."